this is crucial for John Lewis, as in ads are crucial for all the shops that we're seeing and all the retailers and suppliers. And, you know, because businesses this morning, we see elsewhere in the news, are very unhappy. They say job losses are coming. They say growth is not going to happen because of the budget.
So, look, I think the government was in a difficult position. They set out their stall. They said, we've got to raise 40 billion in taxes. They have done that.
Yeah. And
I think the issue, and I'm going to be fair-minded, it'll be whether the thing will hang or fall on whether they get growth. If they don't get growth in the next 2 years, they're going to have to come back and raise taxes again. And I think at that point, the governments will be bust.
Based upon the plan, former Chancellor, do you think they will get growth, as you put it?
I don't think they will, because I think the problem you've got is you've got businesses who are essentially trying to employ people, they're trying to grow and be successful. They're paying more tax. And in their minds, they think, well, the businesses will pay, but the workers won't. But, of course, what will happen, and the OBR said this, is that the businesses will pass on the costs of the extra taxation to consumers in the form of higher prices for goods. And they won't employ as many people or necessarily give their workforce the wage increases that the workers would want to see. So it will have an effect across the entire community if you increase taxes on businesses.
No? Well, raw economics, it does look like Kwesi's calculation of it is actually right to a certain degree, but in terms of how things actually really work in the real world, these organisations will always add a little bit onto the actual tax increase or so, and they'll pass it on to customers so they can actually make sure that they get they make a little bit more profit than they probably would do otherwise or so.
Well, because they've got to, because they're businesses. I mean, it's not because they're mean, is it? It's because they're a business.
It's profit. It's a profit organisation. It's a profit-seeking organisation. So, look, in that regard, look, I am very concerned about the nature of the state of the economy also. How do we potentially get some degree of notional growth, and how does that growth become real for real people in real people's pockets? Not just notional growth on a graph or so. That's one of the problems of the stories of the US election, that the numbers on the paper looked great or so. The economy was doing very, very well, but people weren't feeling it in their pockets.
That's the problem.
It wasn't becoming a real thing to real people, and that's what we have to go through.
How do we get to that? When will we start?
It's very hard. I mean, I think it's... And also, to be fair, try and be open-minded about it, it's a European problem. It's not just a problem that we're facing in the UK. It's a problem across the whole of the EU and large parts of the Western world.
Well, the problem that we are facing only in the UK is the problem with the Church of England. Now, we've been running with this story every morning. Every morning the story has built and developed. The Archbishop's gone. He's toast. This morning we hear, overnight this news has broken, that up to 30 members of the clergy are facing instant dismissal, basically, or if they don't resign. Vicars, deacons, bishops, a number of bishops, right at the top, 30, because they knew what was going on in terms of the sex abuse with Smythe, and they did what the Archbishop did and looked the other way. This is having a major impact on our national institution of the Church of England, isn't it?
I think it's a disaster for the Church. My understanding is that John Smith was doing this for, 35, 40 years? And the Archbishop himself had been warned about him when he was a young...
In the 80s?
Yeah, 1981. Yeah. So clearly a lot of people knew, and then for whatever reason, nothing happened. It was only really at the end of John Smith's life that the police got involved, and he died, 6 years ago, 2018. Yeah. And they've been doing this for 40 years. Yes. So it's really, really terrible.
The subsequent question is, why does this keep happening like this? So we saw a similar situation of cover-up in the Catholic Church. Also, I'm not going to call it cover-up at the BBC, but I would say that we saw a similar situation with Jimmy Savile and
allowing him to hide in plain sight.
Yeah, exactly, allowing him to hide in plain sight, and now we're seeing it similar. Why the thematic response, which is turn a blind eye to, which of course is trying to protect the integrity of the institution, which is, of course, there's no defence whatsoever. But I'm just wondering, why aren't people listening to whistleblowers? Channel 4 News had reported about this about 7 years ago.
They did.
This is not new.
2017.
So the question it now comes to is that, why is it also coming to the fore right now?
Well, it's come to the fore now because an independent inquiry, all these years on, came up with the findings which stated unambiguously that the Archbishop of Canterbury had turned his face away when he should have reported it to the police. It seems to me that it's slightly analogous, although it's a very different issue, with what happened with the Post Office. That the guys at the top and the women at the top protect the institution. Their reflex is to protect the institution and never mind the individual who's been crushed.
But also there's a whiff of... And there was the issue with the BBC as well. that they're looking after their own. So this man was a QC, he was someone who was eminently respectable, he was running these holiday camps. And the suspicion, I think, amongst many people is that they were just protecting him. Not just the institution, but they were protecting him because he was sort of one of their mates kind of thing. And it was nod, you know, that happens a lot in Britain. You know, nod, nod, wink, wink. You know, we know about him, but we'll try and not you know, cause too much of a fuss. I think there's a little bit of that.
When
it's terrible. It's terrible.
When it was that severe, do you think they didn't know the severity of it, but just? I mean, it's just hard to imagine that anybody could.
So when
nod and wink about something like this.
When the Dame Janet Smith review was taking place at the BBC, I was working at the BBC at the time. One of the questions that we pondered, or those of us who were working within the actual space, one of the questions we kept pondering is that why the BBC? Why wasn't this some sort of scandal that's happening at, say, ITV at the exact same time or so? Why was it just the BBC that was targeted? And the subsequent question was, and the answer was that we just didn't really come to a conclusion as to why at that particular time, or not a conclusion I was aware of.
Is it because some institutions offer more protection to hide?
Yeah, I think there's,
for example, we know that there is a certain kind of man who is drawn to join the police because they know that it will give them the carapace of authority to commit sex crimes, including rape and murder. That's happened.
That's happened,
It's happened. And I just wonder, because the BBC is such a respectable establishment, in the same way, or was, in the same way that the Church of England was a respectable
establishment. But we had this.
It's a good place
we had this in Parliament. We had this in Parliament. You know, there were a lot of people, and not lots, but there were a number of people who were doing terrible things. And I think the institution does protect them.
It's a good place to hide, isn't it?
That's an institutional response.
So thematically, it looks like we're looking at organisations that you would describe as critical national infrastructure, organisations that are vital to the continuity of the country, to our life as a nation. But I still think at the exact same time, that, and you've pointed out that these things happen in Britain, the question that we need to be asking now is, do we have the systems and controls in place to ensure this is not happening today? That there's not some child somewhere or somebody else somewhere who's been sacrificed at the altar of protecting the perception of an institution? Well,
the investigative journalist who we had on the programme here on Tuesday, who actually uncovered this scandal, handed it over to Channel 4, who made the documentary you referred to, he said unambiguously on this programme, and he said elsewhere, no, this is not just a historic problem. There is abuse going on right now in the Church of England.
OK, well, that's a terrible, serious allegation. My sense is that there's more transparency now. I think the kinds of things that happened in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of these things are historic, they could be covered up. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have
perhaps
any
victims
of
didn't feel as able to speak out.
That's exactly right.
But with that said, we had the internet in 2017, and still, Justin Welby, who for all intended purposes has been fairly a bright light in Britain, has actually done some really great work also in trying to make Britain a more fair and egalitarian place.
Well, he's been a political guy. I mean, let's...
Religion is inherently political, regardless of what, but particularly, exactly, there's no way to deny it. So I think he's done, to his credit also, he's done some great stuff in that regard. But this over here has been pretty much, not even open secret, it's been in the public domain.
But what was extraordinary about talking about Justin, I mean, I know him and I respect him, but his response to the initial what happened was really cack-handed. I mean, he had to go. It was obvious.
Of course he did.
But he kind of resisted a bit, and that I think cast a slight shadow on.
Well, I wonder what the next development's going to be. As I say,
I mean,
this is overnight.
I have to say, my heart absolutely breaks, of course, for those that have suffered abuse, and the idea that there might be still happening is just revolting and terrifying. But I also feel rather sorry for the hard-working clergy that are trying to do their best in their communities, that, you know, may well be innocent. Well, and the whole institution and all the work they're trying to do is gone as well.
Well, this happened,
on every level, this is devastating.
I hate to bring it
Obviously
back to
worse for the victims.
Yeah, I hate to bring it back to my experience, but it was exactly the same with MPs. You get a few MPs behaving very badly, and that casts a huge shadow of suspicion on the whole institution.
Yes.
And that's very hard on people who are actually doing their jobs for the right reasons.
And as we said yesterday, in terms of trust and trust in institutions, when trust leaves, it leaves on horseback. But when it comes back on foot. You know, once you've lost it, it's very hard to get back.
I think that, so the allegation actually that there's still abuse going on, given that the Church has offered, of course, a link to schools or so. So I'm a member of the Church of England in Maida Vale, St Peter's Church of England, so I also went to St Peter's Primary School in Maida Vale too. Shout out to them, absolutely brilliant church, brilliant school. But the idea, once again, the links between the two also is something that we should be very concerned about giving access to. So there has to be clear systems, clear controls and clear transparency where there's been failings in the past those people have to go. So there's 30 bishops or so that are in the lineup for this, then there has to be a clear-out. Who's going to become the next archbishop is completely anyone's guess. We might end up with a 20-something-year-old archbishop if we're not careful or so. So it leaves us very confused as a nation.
OK, I'd like to throw a name into the air here, and I wonder how many people have heard of Pete Hesketh. Pete Hesketh. OK, he's the Fox News presenter who is now going to be Chief of Defence of the United States of America.
I mean, he's got to be appointed by the Senate. I mean, he's got to be...
He will be.
Trump has made clear he will push it through, come what may. He'll suspend the Senate if he has to get
do
this
it in
through.
recess?
Yeah, exactly. Do it in a recess. Yeah, you're right.
So I've heard of him. I haven't met him. But to say he's just a TV presenter is not being quite straight. I mean,
go on, then.
He fought in the... He's a veteran.
Yep.
He's a very educated, credible guy. He's been a champion of veterans' issues for 20 years. He did tours of duty, I think, in Afghanistan, maybe Iraq and other places. So even though it's an unorthodox choice, to say he's just
Well, I knew he was a veteran.
That's how he's been painted, though, because he has no government experience.
That's true.
But I wonder whether that's picking up on what you say about trust. One of the reasons why people voted Trump, many reasons, part of it what they felt in their pockets, we were saying before, but also because they just felt like, I don't trust any of this lot. He might not be fully trustworthy either, but I sort of believe him.
Exactly right.
And maybe that's what Trump's trying to do. He's trying to hire people.
Just a quick point. Trump himself had no government experience.
Well, quite.
And he was elected to president twice. So the fact that his defence secretary
doesn't mean he won't be popular.
It's not that big a deal.
No.
It's a very big deal. It's an $850 billion budget. Look, if you go into the corporate world anywhere, you're always taught that there's 3 E's of professional life. Education, exposure and experience. Also experience, exposure and education, so the proper way down. Education counts for the most minor part of it. About 5% is what we often say. It's why no one often checks your degrees when you go into work somewhere. So experience counts for about 75% of the professional life and how well you'll do on a particular job. Experience matters. Experience matters. Experience matters. You wouldn't trust somebody walking off the street or so with no experience to present a TV show such as Fox and Friends, which is what he presented. Yet for some bizarre reason, the idea that we can trust somebody whose predominant career has been on television. Yes, he did fight in Iraq and Afghanistan or so, and he is a Harvard graduate. But that experience of managing an office, a Department of State with huge international consequences at a time of very, very serious instability should not count for nothing.
But what about this? People say that when you're managing those big departments, or big business, a lot of it's to do with people. A lot of it's to do with managing people and instinct, and then you get good people underneath you to look at the spreadsheets. Is there not an argument
But the main thing I would say about this is that under normal circumstances, I think what Nell says is right. But the whole premise of Trump, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, is that the whole system is bust.
He's
an outsider. He's going to drain the swamp. They're all bust, they're all corrupt, and I'm going to bring new people in. Now, you might disagree with that. I might disagree with that. But that's the premise. That's what he's saying. And so it's not surprising.
So he's got to deliver on it in his decision.
If that's what he thinks.
And it's certainly the
he's going to bring new people
that
in.
Many a government minister here in America, wherever, wings it. You know, they find themselves in a position, a great position of state, and they don't know what they're doing. And the first thing they do is talk to the civil servants.
That's right.
Well, how do I do this?
And that's the point that Trump is trying to make. He's saying, I want someone who's going to counteract the civil. He's not going to be dominated by civil servants.
We mustn't pretend as if Trump himself... Trump has been normalised effectively right now. And democracy, this is the... democracy is a beautiful thing until it's not a beautiful thing or so. The people have spoken. The B words, as the opposite. But it's the way it is. Trump is one or so. I find he's been an interesting guy. But he's not somebody you would actually trust with your household budget.
That may be
true.
Let
alone your national budget.
That may be true.
Let alone...
There's been a contest...
Sorry, you wouldn't trust Trump with your personal budget?
I wouldn't. You wouldn't. I don't think anyone would trust... I wouldn't trust Trump with anything.
Hundreds of thousands of millions of Americans do trust him because they felt like they're...
Just because 80 million people voted for or 70-something million people voted for a television host to actually run the nation or so. And I love television hosts.
He gets to run the nation.
Yeah, he does get to run the nation, but it doesn't mean that we, objective commentators, should see this as a good thing that we should be encouraging. Donald Trump was not Kate or Richard or Envy, or yourself, or dare I even say myself. He's somebody who was literally on the crazier side of entertainment.
All of those things are true.
That is true.
But he won a Democratic mandate.
what you're saying is this is the reality.
This is the reality.
Yeah.
And also, to be fair to him, he's never hidden what he is.
No.
He said that these guys are corrupt. He says that they stole the election. He said a whole bunch of crazy stuff. He said he's going to bring in people to drain the swamp or whatever the phrase is. Yeah. And that's what he's doing.
I think it might be reflective of the fact that maybe those of us in the West or so, maybe we're privileged enough to the point where we can stop taking democracy as seriously as we have to.
That's a very good point.
In 2008, during the ascendancy of Boris Johnson, I was working in the City of London. Just to make clear to people at home,
to be mayor of London.
To be mayor of London. I was working in the City of London at the time. I was working in the financial sector. And just because I had very big commitment issues, hence why I jumped careers. What was interesting at the time, working there, speaking to anybody, I mean, fund managers, anybody, people at reception, anywhere, they always had one consistent theme, which was that, at least with Boris Johnson, who was running against Ken Livingstone, who's a serious administrator of state, at least with Boris Johnson, at least you get a laugh out of him. At least he's funny. And I'll look back and think,
that comes back to the people person, doesn't it? The communication and connection.
But that means that we've been doing this since Reagan, and we've been declining since Reagan, too, as a result of it. That we should not be in a situation where we're looking to our national leadership for entertainment.
I'd rather have a Reagan than a Nixon any day, to be honest with you. But look, can we bring it back home now? The civil service, the Civil Service Union, are insisting that a 4-day working week with no reduction in pay will be good for their mental health. This caused a bit of a row in the Commons yesterday. Let's have a quick look at PMQs with Kemi Badenoch taking on the Prime Minister about this scheme. Here it comes.
If he is going to bail out the public sector, then can he tell us this? Does he think it is appropriate, as the Ministry for Housing has done, to approve a 4-day week for councils that is not flexible working, but is actually part-time work for full-time pay?
Questions based on what we're actually doing are usually better than fantasy questions made up. What did they deliver in 14 years? Low growth, stagnant economy, a disastrous mini-budget, a £22 billion pack hold. And now she wants to give me advice on running the economy. I don't want to be rude, but no, thank you very much.
He didn't answer the question, did he?
I think what the reasoning is that that if they reorganise the hours and allow people to have one day off, as it were, or one day freer in their week, then they will hold on to retention of good people and it will actually save money. That's the argument.
And it's true. We shouldn't measure the quality of life just purely in terms of pounds and pence, or so that people weren't born and put on this planet to work 7 days a week, to work 5 days a week or 7 days a week or so. If we can shorten the amount of time people can work or so, or maybe just increase an hour on either end of the day or something else like that, to actually make sure they actually still meet the hours. I think that's a good thing, because the more time people get to spend with their families or so, the more time people get to spend with themselves and everything else or so, the better a society will be. We can't measure certain things exclusively in pounds and pence. Sometimes we have to measure life in terms of...
But there will be people, though, saying, well, I have to work 7 days a week because I need to pay the bills and I have to measure my life in pounds and pence.
And this is the fundamental conversation that I always have with Nels and other people. We've got to grow the economy to pay for public services. You know, the public services that we've built over decades require pounds, shillings and pence, to use that old phrase.
Can you imagine in the private sector...
They're keeping the hours the same, though, aren't they? That's the proposal, is the hours.
But can you imagine in the private sector
going
to your employer and saying, you know what, I don't fancy coming in on Fridays anymore. I'm doing a 4-day week, but I want the same money. I mean, you know what the reply would be.
And that's where the problem will be, because I think, you know, certainly in my constituency, a lot of small private businesses, you know, small logistics businesses, haulage businesses, they don't, you know, if you're a lorry driver, you can't work 4 days a week.
Absolutely.
Because you need to ferry the goods, you know, the trade keeps going.
Last point, because we're over time.
It's not universal, but in every single industry, people are divided into one or two. You're either talent or you're a worker. And if you're talent or so, you can go to your employer and say to them, look, I wish to work 4 days a week, and they'll quickly do it for you because they want to retain talent at all costs. But if you turn around and actually give people talent that actual opportunity, it will incentivise people who are classified as workers to work harder and perform better to become in the talent bucket.
Well, I'm clearly a worker, because I've never been in a conversation of any
certainly are.
For that.
You're doing a radio show after after this, aren't you?
Sorry?
You're doing a radio show after this?
Radio show, yeah, 5 days a week.
You never stop.
Mind you, I love doing both, so I cannot complain. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you.